medieval law castrated pederasts and rapists. A wide range of offenses during the medieval period called for castration as a punishment, and generally they involved sex. The lex talionis was also common, so castration was an appropriate punishment for sexual assault. Some Germanic laws allowed men to castrate men they found with their wives. During the reign of King Alfred in England 849–901, peasants who committed sexual assault were castrated. Under 7th century Visigothic kings, pederasts were castrated, a punishment instituted by Justinian in the Byzantine Empire during the 6th century. Southeastern tributary states sent eunuchs to China. After the Chinese overthrew the Mongols in 1368, they reasserted dominance throughout Southeastern Asia in a series of military conquests and diplomatic exchanges. Countries like Cambodia, Korea, and Siam sent tributary emissaries, often eunuchs, to China with luxury items and young castrated servants. For example, when Siam sent a tribute to China in 1383, it included 30 elephants, various native products, and 61 servants. These areas similarly adopted eunuchism in their own courts as they were heavily influenced by China. Ethiopians may have castrated Italian soldiers in the late 19th century. Italy claimed Eritrea during the late 19th century and tried to establish itself as a protectorate over Ethiopia in 1889. Ethiopia, determined to resist the Italians, gathered between 100,000 and 200,000 troops to fight against a much smaller Italian force that numbered between 14,000 and 18,000 at the Battle of Adwa on March 1, 1886. Italy, with insufficient supplies and a failure to appreciate the strength of the Ethiopians, suffered a humiliating and shocking defeat. As many as 6,000 Italians were killed at the battle, with 3,000 to 4,000 additional men taken captive. Many of the prisoners, according to some historians, were castrated by their Ethiopian captors. Other scholars dispute this idea, however. Ottoman Empire used eunuchs to manage harems. Like other royal courts, eunuchs in the Ottoman Empire provided services to the ruler without threat or potential challenge to his authority. It's unclear when the Ottoman Empire began using eunuchs, but it most likely began during the 15th century. The Ottoman Empire started using white Christian eunuchs, but soon preferred black eunuchs from Africa. In the Ottoman Empire, castration involved the removal of the penis and the testicles, the removal of the testicles alone, or the removal of the penis alone, with the first method preferred. Once a man was castrated, he entered the service of a lesser noble, where he learned Turkish, as well as the laws and tenets of Islam. Once a eunuch was taken into the royal court, he could slowly work his way through the hierarchy of eunuchs until a cherished position as a harem guard opened up. Harem guards were always at the ready, guarding the doors of the Imperial harem at Topkapi Palace. Black eunuchs acquired power and influence within the Ottoman Empire, and 70 Africans became known by the title Chief Black Eunuch by the 18th century. There was a relatively high turnover rate, however, as eunuchs were replaced when a new sultan came to power. Chinese eunuchs were key imperial officials. Eunuchs, or huangyuan in China, were first mentioned during the Shang Dynasty 1765–1222 BCE and were used by imperial courts until the 20th century. Castrated men were considered innocuous and useful in royal courts in Egypt, Persia, Greece, and Rome, but their use in China far outlasted their use in other cultures. Eunuchs didn't start off as officials and men of influence, however. During the reign of Qin Shi Huangdi in the 3rd century BCE, men were castrated and enslaved for the purpose of building the emperor's elaborate tomb. Court eunuchs became increasingly common by the 3rd century CE and, by the 7th century, were used to command palace guards and oversee the military. The castrated men closest to the emperor developed reputations for being ruthless, cunning, and greedy. During the Ming Dynasty 1368–1644, when hundreds and later thousands of eunuchs dominated the government, attempted purges of eunuchs were common, but often unsuccessful. Castration was a long-standing punishment in China. According to legend, castration was a legal punishment in China from 2281 BC till around 600 CE, although even then its practice still didn't end entirely. Not all Chinese leaders endorsed the use of castration, however, and many outlawed it during their reigns. As a punishment, castration was deemed appropriate in the event of a revolt, for adultery, as an alternative to the death penalty, and for political dissent. Castration in China included the removal of both the penis and testicles. Both organs were cut off with a knife. Early Christians castrated themselves to prove their devotion. During the first 3 centuries of Christian expansion, devotees castrated themselves to prove their dedication to the faith, mostly due to one mention of the practice in the New Testament. Matthew 19:12 reads, "For there are eunuchs who were born that way, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are those who choose to live like eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. The one who can accept this should accept it." Many Christians took it literally. Early church writer Origen 185–251 CE castrated himself, and other Christians followed suit. The problem became so widespread that the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE addressed the issue. If anyone in sickness has been subjected by physicians to a surgical operation, or if he has been castrated by barbarians, let him remain among the clergy, but if anyone in sound health has castrated himself, it behooves that such an one, if already enrolled among the clergy, should cease from his ministry, and that from henceforth no such person should be promoted. But, as it is evident that this is said of those who willfully do the thing and presume to castrate themselves, so if any have been made eunuchs by barbarians, or by their masters, and should otherwise be found worthy, such men the canon admits to the clergy. The Normans castrated enemies to assert their dominance. When the Normans arrived in southern Italy and Sicily during the 11th and 12th centuries, they used castration as discipline for the most heinous crimes. Castration and blinding were set as punishments for treason by William the Conqueror when he invaded England in 1066, a tradition continued by Anglo-Norman and Southern Norman leaders alike. Castration was practiced elsewhere in medieval Europe, usually for sexual offenses. The Normans, however, used it as a way to deprive men of their masculinity, social identity, and power. Rapists were castrated in post-revolutionary Virginia. In 1778, Thomas Jefferson wrote a revised law for the Commonwealth of Virginia, hoping to remove the death penalty from capital offenses. As the head of a committee tasked with revising all of Virginia's laws, the group proposed that whosoever shall be guilty of rape, polygamy, or sodomy with man or woman shall be punished, if a man, by castration, if a woman, by cutting through the cartilage of her nose a hole of 1/2 inch diameter at the least. Historians debate whether Jefferson meant this law to be lex talionis, where the perpetrator of a crime is punished by injury to the part of his anatomy most comparable to where the victim of the crime was harmed. In the Byzantine Empire, eunuchs were some of the best military generals. Like their Chinese counterparts, the Byzantine Empire used eunuchs as army commanders, court officials, churchmen, and high administrators. In the Byzantine Empire, two of the most successful generals were eunuchs, namely Solomon D. 544 and Narses 480-574. Both men were sent to reconquer areas of the former Roman Empire by Justinian, who used eunuchs as soldiers because they didn't have ties to rival aristocratic families. Solomon was accidentally made a eunuch as a baby and was used by Justinian to conquer the Moors in North Africa. It's unclear how Narses became a eunuch, but he went from Imperial Guard to Grand Chamberlain under Justinian, ultimately becoming one of his most loyal and trusted men. Narses was sent to Italy to fight against the Ostrogoth kingdom during the 550s and became the prefect at Ravenna. Having a governing eunuch of Ravenna became a common aspect of Byzantine rule in the western half of the Mediterranean. From the late 6th century until the end of the Exarchate in 751, several of the exarchs were eunuchs. 18th century Russian Christian mystics castrated themselves. The Russian Skoptsi were a sect of Russian Orthodox Christians that began during the 18th century. The group's founder, Andrei Ivanov, was previously a flagellant, but castrated himself and 13 disciples in 1757. Ivanov was arrested and sent to Siberia where he died, but his followers kept the castration cult alive. Ivanov's assistant, Kondraty Selovanov, was also sent to Siberia, but he escaped and returned to St. Petersburg. He declared himself to be the Son of God and was arrested several times before his death in 1832. The group's popularity and devotion to God through self-castration appealed to peasants and middling ranks of society alike. The male members of the group castrated themselves, and the female members removed their breasts. By the middle of the 19th century, 515 male and 240 female members were forced to go to Siberia between 1847 and 1866. Because the sect had around 5,444 members, its numbers weren't severely damaged by the deportations. It wasn't until Joseph Stalin's series of persecutions that the group was thought to be eliminated from Russia. There are anti-sexuals in Russia today, however, who are associated with Skoptsi and self-castration. Sex offenders are still surgically or chemically castrated in Western cultures. Sex offenders are still surgically or chemically castrated in Western cultures. During the Renaissance, Italians castrated young boys to turn them into sexually appealing singers.
Hey guys, thank you so much for the support and like and comment down below, and also thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to see you in the next video. Then take care, bye.